2019, Joey and his brother Leo Grossinger began rewilding their neighborhood. I'll say as a result, curious and interested neighbors began planting in their own gardens, and I will let them tell you more about the outcome. Joey is a freshman at Berkeley High School. He's been working on the pollinator pathway for the last 5 years and enjoys bird identification and native plant cultivation. And Robin Grossinger is the founder of Second Nature Ecology and Design, where he works with cities, corporations, and communities to redesign our cities with nature. He's also Joey's dad. So would you join me in welcoming Joey and Robin?
Thanks, Kathy. It's great to be here. I'm Robin. That's Joey. Yeah, we're going to talk now about a corridor even smaller, at an even smaller scale than what Amber talked about. That's one of my favorite projects, by the way, the Green Hair Street corridor. And so we're going to talk about at the block scale, kind of, house to house, building a small little corridor in South Berkeley. Here's our neighborhood. We're the fourth house in from the corner on the lower side of the block there. It's a residential neighborhood, kind of typical Berkeley neighborhood, fairly small lots, smallish houses and yards, a lot of back house units and small apartment buildings. So there's not really that much green space to work with. These are fairly small spaces. But there are these little spots along the streets, pretty much available. Not a lot going on there often. And the centerpiece, kind of maybe somewhat of the catalyst of this project, is the oak tree in the center of the corner of the street, in the corner, the intersection of Russell Street and Fulton in South Berkeley, near Berkeley Bowl, kind of near Sylvia Mendez. And so that was planted by the neighbors. We chose a coast live oak tree when the city put in a traffic circle almost 20 years ago. And that was kind of a burst of enthusiasm around starting to work with native plants. And the tree became, the tree was a lot smaller. This is at 2 years old. It's like 6 or 8 feet tall. Joey's older brother is 2. He's at UC Davis now. That's me, looking a lot younger. And so everything has grown up a lot since then. And it's become a big tree. It's actually bigger. That was a few years ago. It's really quite a substantial tree. And it's become arguably like the kind of a core part of our neighborhood. You can see people put ornaments on the tree in the every winter. It's very celebratory. And, you see that. Everyone sees that every day as they go through the neighborhood. There was snow put down one year, like fake snow. And people would stop to take photographs in front of it. If you can see, there's like a little Instagrammable moment there. So that was kind of the core of our ecology of the neighborhood. And it actually came under threat when the city planned to cut down all the trees in traffic circles a few years ago. And this became a big fight with, or moment of activism in the city for concerns about traffic safety, which weren't really that well-founded as we dug into it, if traffic circles are well-maintained. And so, the kids got involved and spoke at city council. That's little Joey there. And in fact, 2 of the key people, actually, I realize are here today in that movement, citywide movement to save the trees and traffic circles, John Steer and Aaron Deem. They deserve that. Those are 2 real leaders in this world. And interestingly, the Adopt a Spot, this really successful new program of the city, Adopt a Spot, came out of that whole endeavor and John's work over the years. So it's neat to see that. But then in our own neighborhood, that became kind of a catalyzing moment, and we planted all these native plants in the traffic circle, and it had these fairly mature manzanitas and ceanothus and gum plant. And it was a great little spot, but we did realize it was fairly isolated and just on its own, a little island of nature, of ecology, the biomass of the tree and these plants, but surrounded by not much else, but potentially a nucleus of something bigger. So that's where I'm going to turn it over to Joey to get into the project.
The pollinator pathway really started when our neighbor across the street, Jesse, reached out to us after seeing what we had done in our parking strip and what we did in the traffic circle. And he was wondering if we could do something like that for his. His parking strip was your average Berkeley parking strip, about 80 feet long though, just 3 feet wide, covered in crabgrass and weeds. We started by manually digging it up, and here's Jesse, the owner, planting the first plant, a small sagebrush. And you can see a while later, it's really grown into the space and is contributing to the natural ecosystem. Just a while later, our other neighbor reached out to us after seeing what we had done in Jesse's parking strip and asked us if we could do something in his parking strip. He had just recently put down gravel and weed felt, and we didn't really know how planting in that would work, but we cut holes in the weed felt and stuck little plants in there, and they grew in very well, and yeah. And then one of our newer parking strips was when our next door neighbors just moved in. We offered to plant their parking strip with native plants, and they loved the idea. So we manually dug it out and planted native plants, and it worked very well. This slide really represents how quickly the parking strips grew in. We dug it out on January 18th of 2019 and planted a month later when we had time. And then just 3 months later, they already starting to grow in. The smaller plants and the bigger shrubs followed. Just 2 years later, they're already pretty fully mature, and they're really looking quite good. This slide really represents how community has played an aspect in why we are planting these plants. Planting these neighbors' parking strips, it's really improved our relationships with our neighbors, and we've gotten to know them a lot better. On the left is one of our neighbors giving us blue-eyed grass starts to put in our parking strips. And also just, it's been interesting when we do like maintenance on the parking strips. Passerbys are really grateful and really are quite vocal about how much they appreciate what we're doing, because not many people see so much work being put into parking strips, and they're very public space, and and they also really provide a good pedestrian experience because they kind of cut you off. They're kind of, when it's planted, it's kind of cut off from the road on the sidewalk, and it's just very nice to see that.
Yeah, so Joey talked about the community aspect, but we really started it, thinking about the ecology. But so looking at the ecology dimension, we were interested in, as this took off, we got interested in connecting up these little pieces. And so Joey talked about the, ours, which is the one this in this side, and then the long one across the street, that's Jesse's, and then back across on the other side of the street was Michael's, and then the neighbor in between us. And then since then, more we proposed. They made sort of a proposal to other neighbors, like, could we do something similar? And so it became continuous up to the corner, and then it's kind of continued around the corner. And it's interesting how that's been a combination of, you do think about kind of the goals of today and like how does this sort of thing spread at a very small scale. I think it's been a lot for us, just the highly visible nature, as Joey said, of being out there. It's different from your front yard or your backyard. It's like you're really out there in public space, and so people interact with you. And these other neighbors have said, "Oh, that looks nice." I don't think they necessarily know what the plants are or thinking particularly about ecology, but it looks better, and it seems it's so much nicer than it was before. So other people say, could we do that in ours? So it's been a very organic approach, and then also being a little proactive once we've gotten some momentum and saying, hey, would you like, to do that in yours? It's been a combination. And then even around the corner, some folks doing it just on their own accord, I think, just following the, kind of the energy of the neighborhood. So now we do have a fairly continuous, these are very small spaces. They're 3 feet wide, but you can see there's a fair amount of length to be gained. There's a lot of these throughout the city and just in our spot, and they can be quite connected because they're just one after the other. So we now have kind of connection up to that oak tree and going around the corner, sort of off that nucleus. So it's very small, but it's interesting to think about what this could be if multiplied out across multiple blocks in our neighborhood. So like imagining our little half block piece, but if that was done across the neighborhood, for example, we have 1 oak tree. You could have 15 or 20 oak trees, which is enough oak trees to support a colony of acorn woodpeckers. And then if you had 1 granary tree, you can also think about how the pollen resources along that stretch of the street, if that was continued through the whole length of our neighborhood, along all these streets, you'd have these bee lines, if you will. Good foraging resources, and bees actually do like to travel in straight lines. It's very efficient, point A to point B. So you can imagine those resources and those activities going along throughout the neighborhood. And then you can also think about nest boxes, like we think about the chestnut-backed chickadee. We have a chestnut-backed chickadee box, which has been occupied. And those, they have pretty big territories, so you can only have like 1 or 2 at the scale of our neighborhood. So you can think about like, where do you actually want those? And water features, that catalyzes ecology a lot. So having a couple ponds or water features and bird baths distributed. So it's interesting to think about, as Doug's work, like you could really scale this up and on the small scale to have a big impact at the neighborhood level. Going back to some of the practical things we've learned, sort of lessons learned, working in this kind of unique environment along the street.
Some of the lessons that we've learned while planting these partnerships are how difficult the conditions are. They get a lot of sun because they're kind of a little bit in the middle of the street, and very little water because they're hard to reach places. But these are some of the plants that kind of the backbone of our parking strips and some of the plants that have been most reliable. Mickamin manzanita, which we planted a lot, has really good berries for birds. California fuchsia, which has good flowers that flower pretty late in the year. California sagebrush is a very reliable, large shrub, very fragrant shrub. Creeping wild rye is a good tall grass that we plant a lot. Blue-eyed grass is a very reliable flowering grass, and Douglas iris, which we planted a lot in our parking strips. Also, some plants have self-propagated, which they really thrived up and down our parking strips. Blue-eyed grass that I mentioned, narrow-leaf milkweed that has really spread a lot, which for the monarchs. Snakeweed buckwheat spread a lot when we let it go to seed.
And so, in this tough environment, one of the things we found is sort of this, some of these plants have worked in a complementary way, actually just by accident. Three Sisters probably overstating it a little bit, but this idea that the plants are helping each other. And so, like California sagebrush, very, tolerant of these hot, dry conditions surrounded by pavement. We don't water almost at all, and yet it thrives. And underneath, we found buckwheat and some of these smaller, slightly more sensitive plants have really done well with that, a little bit of protection. Similarly, there's some occasional street trees, like this is just a random, East Coast deciduous maple, but it seems to be helping the ceanothus do better, because we've actually lost a few ceanothus out where they've gotten really baked. But this one is thriving with that little bit of shade. And similarly, the ryegrass there. And on the right, manzanita, which also seems to just handle it fine and look great all the time, no matter, with really no care or watering. And the sagebrush providing some, a little bit of kind of temperature moderation for the Douglas iris and some little grasses. And then another whole dimension is, of course, interacting with the parking strip is right where everybody parks. So it is a little bit of a complicated spot to work in. And so you do have to think about the movement, the foot traffic going, across it, and the relationship to parked cars. So one thing Joey pointed out as we were working out there, he realized the red zone was actually a really good spot to prioritize, because people can't park there. You don't have to worry about the doors. And so you can do more of a wall of vegetation. You can also put some more of your sensitive, slightly vulnerable plants out there. Maybe a good spot for milkweed and caterpillars. So that's been useful. But then there are plenty of places, obviously, where people are going to park. So we try to have gaps every 8 or 10 feet. We have a flagstone. So we're trying to direct people's activity and through those, to certain areas so that the stuff doesn't get completely trampled. And as you can see, some of these plants are fairly formidable. You're not just going to traipse through a big old, sagebrush or manzanita. Those are, they're going to hold their own. So we have tended to create some fairly strong, I don't want to say imposing, but they have a presence and sort of occupy the area. And then some smaller plants scattered around those. And these last few pictures, are taken just recently in the last couple weeks. So they don't necessarily look their best right this second, as they looked a lot, more lush and flowerful in April and May, but they're still doing pretty good in, at the end of the long dry season with very little, with no watering. So it's pretty self-sustaining. We don't do a whole lot of maintenance. One thing we do is we have mulch down there annually that we tend to put down. That's another community thing. We buy a big load of mulch with the neighbors. It's really cost effective at that scale and keeps the weeds down. So that said, the cars do park wherever they want to. That one's not like quite where we planned it. So we do have to have our plants be somewhat durable and tough. And so there's been a bit of self-selection towards plants that are okay losing a limb or getting stepped upon occasionally. And those are the ones that have really worked well. So in closing,
some of the plants that we've gotten in our parking strips, some of the ones I haven't mentioned are yarrow up in the top left, woolly sunflower, foothill penstemon, western redbud, all in our parking strips. Some of the animals that we've gotten are ladybugs here eating some aphids, some slender salamanders, an array of different caterpillars, monarch caterpillars, of course. We just want to end to focus on the monarchs. Here's a full life cycle in our 3 feet wide, 10 feet long milkweed patch. Special thanks to all of our neighbors, Michael, Letitia, Jesse, Michael, Letitia, and Travis, George and Nancy, Susan, and Don.